Thanksgiving always smells the same: roasted turkey, burned butter, cinnamon forced into everything. I parked at the end of John's driveway because the front had already been claimed by my sister's car. The porch lights were on, too bright, as if this were a celebration. I sat in my car for a moment before getting out. 2 hours earlier, I had been adjusting a ventilator. A man in his 60s, septic shock. His blood pressure unstable. His daughter gripping my sleeve and asking me if he could still hear her. Yes, I told her. Talk to him. Here, no one would ask what I had done today. I stepped out. John opened the door before I knocked. He always anticipated entrances. He liked controlling the first impression. "You're late," he said, loud enough for the living room to hear. "I was at work." He smiled as if that were indulgent. "We all work." Behind him, the dining room was already set. My mother, Sarah, moved between the table and kitchen with rehearsed precision. Emily stood near the fireplace in a fitted cream sweater, her phone angled carefully toward her face. "The doctor arrives," Emily said lightly. "Saving the world again?" I kissed my mother's cheek. She held me for half a second longer than necessary. "You look tired," she said, not concerned, observing. 12 hours, I replied. "Well," John said, clapping once, "tonight is about family." I removed my coat. I had come straight from the hospital. I had not changed out of my dark slacks and simple blouse. There was a faint crease at my wrist where gloves had pressed for hours. At the table, my seat was at the far end. It always was. Not quite excluded. Not central. Conversation moved in circles above the food. Investments, travel plans, renovations. John spoke about a new partnership. Emily described a strategic shift in her latest venture. My mother refilled glasses before they were empty. No one asked about the ICU. When I reached for the salt, John leaned toward a guest from church. "She's always been independent," he said, as if explaining an irregularity. "Never needed much guidance." I set the salt down carefully. In medicine, tone tells you more than words. A subtle drop in oxygen saturation, a rhythm slightly off. You notice before others do. The air in that room had a rhythm, and it was rehearsed. Dessert arrived with ceremony. My mother dimmed the lights slightly. Candles were lit. John stood. He did not rush. He never rushed when he had an audience. He tapped his glass once. The sound was sharp and clean. "Family," he began, spreading his gaze across the room. "I thought this Thanksgiving would be the perfect moment to discuss something important." Emily straightened. She had known. My mother folded her hands at her waist. Calm. Prepared. "I've been reviewing our estate planning," John continued. "Transparency is important. No surprises later." He reached down and lifted a leather briefcase onto the table. The gesture was theatrical. He opened it slowly and removed several thick folders, each one tabbed. He handed the first to Emily. "For you," he said warmly. She accepted it without hesitation. Her fingers slid over the cover as if greeting something already familiar. A second folder went to my mother. She did not open it. She simply placed her hand on top of it, claiming it by touch. Then he looked at me. He did not smile this time. He slid the final folder across the table. It stopped against my plate. "Sign it," he said, casual, controlled. 9.8 million goes to Emily. It's fair." The number hung in the air. 9.8 million. No one reacted. That was the confirmation. They had known. Emily kept her eyes lowered, but there was a small shift in her posture, a quiet possession. I did not touch the folder immediately. In trauma care, when a decision arrives suddenly, you do not respond at once. You assess. You slow the room down. "What is it?" I asked. John exhaled lightly, as if indulging a child. "A redistribution. You have your career, your income, stability. Emily is building something. This evens things out." "Evens things out," my mother echoed gently. I opened the folder. Pages, legal formatting, signature line flagged in yellow, my name already typed neatly beneath it. You're the practical one, Emily added softly. You understand. I turned one page, then another. I'd like the lawyer to read it, I said. The temperature in the room shifted. It's already handled, John replied. Then having him read it won't change anything. He leaned back in his chair. His jaw tightened. It's straightforward. I verified documents before signing, I said. It's routine. Emily's fingers pressed into her folder. You don't trust us? She asked. Trust. In the hospital, trust is built on data, on labs, on scans, on second opinions. I closed the folder gently and pushed it back toward John. I don't sign under pressure. No one spoke. The silence lengthened. John's voice lost a degree of warmth. This is family, not a courtroom. Have the lawyer read it? I repeated. My mother's smile had faded, just slightly. Why complicate something generous? She asked. I looked at her. Generosity doesn't require urgency. The words were simple, even. John's hand flattened against the table. You're overthinking this. No, I said. I'm thinking. Across from me, Emily finally met my eyes. You always do this, she said quietly. You always step back like you're above it. Above it. I folded my hands in my lap. In the ICU, when monitors alarm and family members panic, you become slower, softer. You create calm by refusing to mirror chaos. I'm not above it, I said. I'm careful. John stood abruptly. Fine, he snapped. We'll call him. Let's put this to rest. He pulled his phone from his pocket. My mother looked at me then. Not angry, concerned. Not for me, for the outcome. Emily shifted in her chair. The script had cracked, and I had not raised my voice once. I had only delayed, and delay, in the right hands, is control. John didn't leave the table when he made the call. He stood at the head of it, phone pressed to his ear, pacing once in a slow arc as if the room were his office, and we were waiting for approval. Yes, he said, now. I want this clarified tonight. He ended the call without another word. The lawyer will join us, he announced. My mother began clearing plates that did not need clearing. Emily remained seated, her back straight, her fingers laced together too tightly. I stayed where I was. In medicine, you learn to measure people by what they do under interruption. Plans fail, schedules collapse. What remains is character. John poured himself more wine. His hand was steady, but he drank too quickly. You could have just signed, he said, not looking at me. I could have, I replied. The silence after that was different. It no longer assumed my compliance. 40 minutes later, headlights crossed the front windows. The lawyer entered with an apology already forming on his lips. Sorry for the hour, he said, stepping into the warmth of the dining room. John sounded urgent. He was older than I remembered, grayer, his briefcase heavier than it needed to be. It won't take long, John said. Just read the transfer so we can finalize. The lawyer glanced at me then. A small pause. Of course. He took the folder from John and opened it. Paper has a sound when turned slowly, deliberate, unhurried. We all listened to it. He read in silence at first, scanning, then again, slower. John shifted. Well, he asked. The lawyer cleared his throat. This is not a simple transfer. John frowned. Of course it is. It's redistribution language. We discussed it. Yes, the lawyer said carefully, but the source of the funds matters. Emily's posture changed, just slightly. What source? My mother asked. The lawyer looked up. These funds are not jointly controlled. John's expression hardened. They're part of the family trust. No, the lawyer replied. They are attached to the secondary trust. A quiet settled over the table. I had never heard of a secondary trust. John's voice sharpened. Explain. The lawyer adjusted his glasses. The secondary trust was established 12 years ago, upon the passing of your father. My grandfather. I kept my face neutral. It stipulates, the lawyer continued, that the principal beneficiary and sole legal controller of the assets is... He stopped. He looked directly at me. Her. The word landed without emphasis, but it changed the air. Emily blinked. That's not correct, John said immediately. The lawyer turned the document toward him. It is. The language is explicit. Sole legal controller. Distribution authority resides entirely with her. My mother's chair scraped softly against the floor. That's impossible, she said. It isn't, the lawyer replied. The structure was sealed, no co-signatory, no joint access. John laughed once. Sharp. You're telling me she controls the 9.8? I'm telling you, the lawyer said, voice steady, that she controls the entirety of the secondary trust, which currently exceeds that figure. The number did not matter. The shift did. I folded my hands in front of me. In the ICU, there is a moment when lab results return and confirm what you suspected. The room adjusts around the data. Emotion follows later. Emily looked at me fully now. You knew? She asked. No, I said. That was true. My grandfather had spoken to me often, but never in specifics. John's voice lost its volume. There must be an error. There is no error, the lawyer replied. The trust was structured to prevent modification without her consent. Silence. Thick. My mother sat down slowly. So she decides everything? She asked. Yes. The word was simple. John stared at me as if recalculating. Why would he do that? He demanded. The lawyer closed the folder carefully. I cannot speculate on intent. But intent was obvious. I had visited my grandfather every month during his last year. I had reviewed his medications, adjusted his diet, sat quietly while he told stories about discipline and patience. He had once asked me, if you were given responsibility, would you flinch? I had answered honestly, no. Across the table, Emily's fingers trembled slightly. This changes things, she said. Yes, I replied. John straightened again, trying to recover authority. Well, he said tightly, then we'll restructure. We'll make a fair arrangement. I met his gaze. There is no restructuring without my approval. The room registered the pronoun. My approval. My mother inhaled slowly. We always assumed... Yes, I said gently. You did. The lawyer gathered the documents into order. I suggest, he said carefully, that any further discussions occur privately and without pressure. Pressure. The word hung between us. John looked at the lawyer, then at me. His confidence had thinned. You'd withhold from your own sister, he asked quietly. It was not accusation, it was disbelief. I did not answer immediately. In medicine, withholding can mean harm or protection. I haven't decided anything, I said. Emily's voice softened. You don't need it. No, I said calmly. I don't. The truth settled heavily in the room. For years, they had assumed I was too busy, too focused on work, too detached to question structures built around me. They had mistaken silence for absence. The lawyer stood. I'll prepare a summary of your authority, he said to me directly, and recommend independent counsel. John flinched at that. Independent. When the lawyer left, the room did not return to normal. No one reached for dessert. No one spoke first. For the first time that evening, no one told me what was fair. John sat down slowly. What are you going to do? He asked. His voice was no longer amplified. It was almost careful. I looked at the folder in front of me, at the highlighted signature line that now meant nothing. I'm going to review everything, I said. My mother nodded faintly as if permission were still hers to give. Emily did not look at me again. The performance had ended, and without raising my voice, I had become the only person in the room who could decide how it would continue. I did not stay long after the lawyer left. No one asked me to. John remained at the head of the table, but he no longer looked like he owned it. My mother began stacking plates again, slower this time, as if returning to routine could restore hierarchy. Emily stood by the window, phone in hand, not typing, just holding it. I took my coat from the back of the chair. "You're leaving?" my mother asked. "Yes." "We haven't discussed anything." "There's nothing to discuss tonight." John finally spoke. "You blindsided us." I paused. "No," I said evenly. "I verified a document." He opened his mouth, then closed it. I left without raising my voice. Outside, the air was cold enough to clear my thoughts. In the hospital, after a code ends, there is a moment when the room empties. Machines quiet. Staff disperse. You stand alone with what remains. That was how the driveway felt. I drove home without music. At a red light, I allowed myself one controlled breath. Then I began planning. I requested the full trust documentation the next morning. Not from John, from the lawyer. He sent it within hours. The file was thick, structured, precise. My grandfather's name at the top of every primary section. I cleared my kitchen table. Coffee, legal pad, pen. In medicine, charts tell stories. Patterns emerge when you line dates side by side. Trusts are no different. The secondary trust had been established 12 years ago. The language was deliberate. Sole controller, irrevocable authority, protection clause preventing amendment without written consent from the named beneficiary. Me. I read every page twice. There were no co-trustees, no advisory board, no conditional distribution requirements. My grandfather had not created a gift. He had created a safeguard. I turned to the transaction summaries. For the first 3 years after his death, nothing had moved. Then, small administrative fees. Then, something else. An inquiry log. 3 years ago. Access attempt. 2 years ago. Preliminary restructuring proposal submitted. Declined. 1 year ago. Legal consultation requested regarding partial distribution authority. Denied. I sat back. They had tried. Quietly. Methodically. They had not known the language was sealed, or perhaps they had hoped I would never examine it closely. I called the lawyer again. "I need a full record of every inquiry," I said. There was a pause. "You're entitled to it," he replied. "I want names." Another pause. "I'll have my office compile everything." The documents arrived 48 hours later. Requests had not been submitted by Emily. They had been initiated by John, always framed as clarification, always phrased as concern about inactive beneficiary engagement. Inactive. I had been working 80-hour weeks, rotating through trauma, ICU, emergency surgery consults. They had counted on that, counted on me being too occupied with saving lives to question paper. I placed the pages in chronological order. There were handwritten notes attached to one inquiry. Beneficiary unlikely to challenge, prefers autonomy, limited involvement in family financial structures. The handwriting was John's. I recognized the slant. Limited involvement, autonomy. He had mistaken distance for disinterest. I did not feel anger. In surgery, if you let anger enter your hands, you compromise precision. I felt clarity. I called a different number next, an independent attorney recommended by the lawyer. "I need counsel separate from my family," I said. We scheduled a meeting for Monday. On Sunday evening, my mother called. Her voice was soft. "We were surprised," she began. "I understand. You never told us about the trust. I didn't know the details." Silence. "Well," she continued carefully, "Emily has plans. She's already structured investments based on what your father discussed." That was premature. Another silence. "It would look divisive if you withheld." Divisive. In medicine, you don't amputate to preserve appearance. You operate to preserve function. "I haven't withheld anything," I said. "I'm reviewing." She exhaled slowly. "You've always been distant." "I've always been working." "That's not the same thing." "No, it wasn't." But I didn't argue. "I'll let you know when I've made decisions," I said. I ended the call before she could reposition the narrative. Monday morning, I sat across from my new attorney, younger than I expected, sharp. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he folded his hands. "You understand the leverage you hold," he said. "Yes." "And you understand they attempted access?" "Yes." "That changes this." "I know." He studied me carefully. "Most clients come in emotional. I prefer documentation." A faint nod. "We can issue a formal notice of authority," he said. "Freeze any future inquiries. Require written acknowledgement that no restructuring discussions occur without your direct consent." "Do it." "And your sister?" "She has no legal standing in the trust." He didn't smile. "Understood." By Wednesday, formal notices had been sent. Certified, delivered. John signed for his. I received the confirmation receipt electronically. 2 hours later, he called. His voice was different now, measured. "You involved outside counsel?" "Yes." "That wasn't necessary." "It was." A pause. "We're family." "Yes." "And you think we'd take advantage?" "I think you tried." Silence. The kind that exposes. "You've changed," he said. "No," I replied. "I've reviewed." He inhaled sharply. "What do you want?" There it was, the question beneath everything. I stood by my apartment window watching traffic move below. In the hospital, when families ask what comes next, I never answer immediately. You give space for the reality to settle. "I want acknowledgement," I said finally, in writing, "that no further attempts will be made without my consent. And after that?" "After that," I said, "I'll decide what is fair." Not him, not Emily, me. He did not argue. For the first time in my life, he did not attempt to overtalk me. "Send it," he said quietly. When I ended the call, I did not feel triumphant. I felt steady. Authority is not loud. It does not require witnesses. It requires structure. For years, they had assumed I would never step into the room where decisions were made. They had mistaken restraint for weakness. But restraint is control. And control, when exercised once and precisely, changes the balance permanently. The acknowledgement arrived on Friday morning. Certified mail. I signed for it myself. The envelope was thick, legal weight. My name printed precisely without embellishment. Inside was a single-page statement drafted by John's attorney. It confirmed that all inquiries into the secondary trust would cease. It acknowledged my sole authority. It stated clearly that no redistribution discussions would proceed without my written consent. At the bottom was John's signature. The ink pressed hard enough to leave an impression through the page. I ran my fingers lightly over it. Pressure always reveals itself somewhere. I placed the document in a folder separate from the rest, not because I feared losing it, because I wanted it visible. Emily called that afternoon. She did not begin with accusation. She began with restraint. "I got a copy," she said. "Yes." "So this is real?" "It is." A pause. "You could have just talked to us." "I tried," I said. Silence shifted on the line. "You don't need it," she said finally. "The money." "That isn't the point." "Then what is?" I looked at the trust summary on my desk. In the hospital, when families argue about care plans, they often think the fight is about treatment. It rarely is. It's about control, about who decides. "The point," I said calmly, "is that decisions were being made about assets that weren't yours to discuss." She exhaled sharply. "You always think you're above it." "I think I'm responsible for it." Another silence. "You're going to punish us," she said. "No," I replied. "I'm going to structure it." There was nothing for her to say to that. She ended the call without goodbye. Over the weekend, I worked. 2 overnight shifts, 3 emergency consults, a complication during post-op recovery that required immediate intervention. Control under pressure is not new to me. You breathe, you assess, you act once. Sunday evening, I sat at my table again. The trust exceeded $9.8 million. Significantly. My grandfather had been patient, disciplined. He had not scattered. He had consolidated. There were clauses I had not fully examined yet: educational allocations, medical hardship provisions, charitable distributions. He had anticipated need, not entitlement. I drafted 3 documents. The first established a formal governance structure under my direction, advisory only, no authority without my approval. The second allocated a defined percentage to a medical scholarship fund in my grandfather's name. He had valued work that required endurance. The third outlined conditional distributions to immediate family members, structured, limited, transparent, no lump sums, no open access, no fairness decided at a dining table. I reviewed each page twice, then once more. When I was certain, I sent copies to my attorney. "Implement," I wrote. John requested a meeting, private, no extended family, no audience. I agreed. We met in his office, not at the house. He remained behind his desk. I chose the chair opposite. He looked older than he had the week before. Authority ages quickly when it loses assumption. "You've restructured," he said. "Yes." "You've locked it down." "Yes." His jaw tightened. "You didn't consult us." "I wasn't required to." Silence. He studied the copy of the scholarship provision. "You're giving money away." "Yes." "To strangers." "To students." He leaned back. "And Emily? She has an allocation." "Conditional." "Yes." He tapped the paper. "You don't trust her." "I don't operate on trust," I said evenly. "I operate on structure." His eyes lifted to mine. "For years," he said quietly, "you never cared about this side of things." "I was never invited to." "That's not true." "It is." He opened his mouth, then stopped. "In surgery, when a complication is exposed, you don't argue with it. You adapt." "What do you want from me?" he asked. There it was again, the question beneath everything. "Nothing," I said. "That's not true." "It is." He frowned. "You think this proves something?" "No." "Then why push back?" "Because you tried to move something that wasn't yours, because you assumed I wouldn't notice, because you believed I was too busy saving other people's lives to protect my own. I did not say those things. Instead, I answered simply, because it was necessary." He stared at me for a long moment. The man who had once slid a folder across a table and expected obedience now waited, not for permission, for clarity. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now," I said, "the structure stands." "And if I disagree?" "You can." The simplicity of it unsettled him more than confrontation would have. There was no argument left to win, only reality to accept. Thanksgiving passed quietly the following year. No announcements, no folders. Emily attended, polite and careful. My mother asked about my schedule. John did not mention fairness. The scholarship fund launched that spring. Applications exceeded expectations. My grandfather's name appeared on official letterhead. Clean, uncontested. When the first recipient sent a handwritten note, I placed it in the same folder as the signed acknowledgement. Documentation matters. Proof of impact matters. Silence, when chosen, matters. One evening, months later, John called again. Not about money, not about structure. "How's work?" he asked. "Busy." A pause. "You handle pressure well." "Yes." "I suppose you always have." It was not an apology. It was not admiration. It was recognition. That was enough. "I'll see you next week," I said. "Yes." He did not ask what I planned to do next. He already knew. I would continue, calmly, precisely, without raising my voice. Someone who takes responsibility for lives every day does not surrender control of her own. Authority does not need to announce itself. It only needs to stand once, and stand fully. Have you ever discovered that the quietest person in the room was the only one actually in control? Tell me what you think. And if you appreciate stories where strength is measured in restraint, stay with me.